Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Are we at quorum?
Yes, Sharita, you're at quorum.
I know that Commissioner Carter is out. She won't make it this morning. I think we're good to start, Chair.
Good morning, everybody. Give me 1 second. I'm having computer, printer, all kinds of issues this morning in the clinic. We'll call our meeting officially to order at 10:31 a.m. And the first item on our agenda, well, welcome to everybody, is the approval of our February 2024 minutes. I will entertain any questions or a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes, and I want to say that these are the best looking minutes I have ever seen. Thank you,
They
Angela.
look very nice. Very
They are
nice
wonderful.
minutes. Great job, Angela.
I just wanted to say I was not included in the minutes. And so whether it was excused or unexcused absence, this is Colleen Herbert. I should have been listed as a committee member.
we can make that adjustment.
All right. So I hear one correction that needs to be made just to acknowledge that Colleen is a member, but you were not present, Ms. Colleen?
I don't believe I was.
Okay, but you were not present in the meeting. I just got a message from Ebony saying she's running late, but she's coming apparently. So I have a motion, I have one correction. Do I have to request an addendum to the motion in order for us to go forward, Colin?
Yeah, it would just
Just
be,
in, just in,
Go ahead,
just in
Helen.
case I'll.
Okay, so the motion has been edited by Helen Tripp to include the correction of listing Colleen Herbert as absent, but acknowledge that she is a committee member of policy and planning. I will entertain a second of the motion. Anybody?
Abena, a second.
All right, so I have a motion that's properly been corrected and seconded. All those in favor, please put yes in the chat. And if you're on the phone, please verbally give your yes, no, abstain, and say your name if you're a committee member. Motion carries. The next item on our agenda are the unsheltered numbers. Colin?
unsheltered numbers. Let me put them in the chat here. Give me one moment. So we're down to 36 unsheltered families, 37 unsheltered singles, 27 families at risk of homelessness in 14 days, 20 singles at risk of homelessness in 14 days. And then it looks like there's 132 households currently on our list. And I think if Nicole's here, she can help explain that. Last week, 28 males were referred to the shelter, 3 females and 0 families. 10 households were assisted with move-in assistance and 1 with a travel diversion. So pop those in the chat there for you. Moving in the right direction. Any questions on those? I don't see Nicole Lamb here today, so if there are questions, I may need to reach out to her and get back to you.
I know that I did have questions from the minutes. A question about something that was cited in the minutes. And it's about the unsheltered numbers. So I don't know where is appropriate to ask that question about that.
What's the question?
So I noticed that there was a mention of there were 2 mentions. There were mentions of people coming from Florida, like that somebody was paying, and then there was a mention of some Hispanic persons that came. And so I'm trying to get clarity on that. Were they undocumented?
So there's those are 2 different incidences.
Right.
All right, so the Florida are the most recent, where there were two households that came, or singles that came up, 2 groups, something like that, that came up and were sent up from the Orlando area. The other that we did have Latin families that had come to us a month or probably 2 months ago at this point, that were sent from Chicago to Durham, and supposedly they had family here and they didn't, or they did get here and then the family said, no, you can't stay with us. So then we, as a system, tried to figure out where they could go. I think one family had an option to go to DC, and they had everything bought and paid for, and then met somebody in the lobby of Health and Human Services and decided they're going to go live with that person instead. Those were two very large families that came from Chicago. The folks
So my so my question
Orlando were
around it
stingy.
is, do we know what their documentation status was? Because so what I do know from my work with the National Council is that there are sanctuary cities that are getting bombarded with a lot of people who are crossing the border and coming to the States.
Right.
Chicago is one of those places. And so I'm trying to determine if we are starting to see folks trickle to North Carolina because these other places are kind of reaching capacity and looking for other sanctuary cities to send folks.
I don't have confirmation that they were undocumented. I believe that at least one stated they were on a refugee or an asylum type status, but didn't have paperwork with them.
Mm-hmm.
So the other ones, I don't know that we got far enough with them to determine status, because it's not something we typically ask.
Right, but in light of, so my ask would be in light of the knowledge, at least that I have. I don't know what other people's experience is. I know that there's an influx and that folks are being shipped to certain states, and then those states are struggling to serve them. And so I'm just like, I think that just so we have a good grasp on the potential of a growing problem, I think this is something we may need to track. And people might not be honest, it may not tell us, but the thing is, once we start trying to connect them with services, and so I think the way that you tell that story when you're asking a question matters, because they need to know what they and we need to know what they can access and can't access, if that is the case.
Yeah. I will see what we can do on that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the next item on our agenda is a presentation by our heart team. Ryan, are you here?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
We can hear you. I don't know if everybody got the email that Ryan sent, like just before the meeting. Are you planning on showing the data on the screen? Like, do you need permission to be able to share, Ryan?
I wasn't planning on sharing it. I was planning on just walking through the report. I don't have a separate PowerPoint presentation, just the written report that I emailed out.
Okay.
I could pull up that written report, but I'm not sure how well that would
Help your
show.
talk. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm just going to talk through it. Everyone has a copy of what I'm going to go through that you can reference as you go or look at afterwards if you have questions. So don't feel the need to be taking copious notes. Everything I'm going to say to you is basically in the report that I just emailed you. So am I good to go?
Yes, sir.
You're good to go.
Thanks for the invitation to be here. The purpose of this report is to report out on a pilot that the city ran the weekend of January 19th to 22nd that stood up what was effectively a temporary shelter in the coldest weekend of the year. We did that pilot really for two reasons. One, to respond to what we perceived as an immediate need, but also for this purpose so that we could learn from it and report back to HSAC and others, so that if there was anything from that pilot that might be useful for future planning, you would have that information. So I'm coming to you today in that spirit of just sharing what we learned, what worked, so that you all can have this as one option to consider. So again, this was January 19th to 22nd. We had 3 nights of a cold weather tent stood up in a Durham park. I'll go through the details of how this came about, how it worked. We can talk about budget, and at the end, we'll have no time allocated for questions from all of you. So first, let me talk about how this came about. So about a week before this particular weekend, we were looking at the weather. As you recall, this ended up being, I think, the coldest week of the year. There was an Arctic front that was moving across the states. Weather in Durham was projected the low to drop into the single digits. I reached out to Colin because our team responds as first responders to many calls involving neighbors who were unsheltered. Our teams were concerned about the cold weather. I reached out to Colin to inquire whether or not our kind of white flag or cold weather plans felt that they were going to be sufficient for the cold weather in terms of capacity. And if I recall, and Colin can correct me, in that conversation, Colin said that the plan would hold as it had been for previous white flag nights in terms of the capacity. I asked him for the numbers of folks that we thought may be unsheltered based on the data. And at least from those numbers, it was clear that there was a gap, that we had more neighbors who we believed to be unsheltered than we would have extra capacity added with our current white flag nights. And I proceeded to talk to public safety partners and then get permission from the city manager's office to see if we could pull together a pilot for that upcoming weekend that would expand capacity. So we did this in a week. So the first thing we did is we pulled together some key partners. This included community development, emergency management from the county. Emergency management also brought Duke Healthcare Preparedness Coalition to the table, which ended up being a really crucial partner in this. The Durham Fire Department, the police department was there, and we got together and talked about what options were on the table. It was in that meeting that was about a week before we did this that Duke shared that they had 2 heated tents that came with generators and floors and lighting that they were prepared to make available for the city for this weekend if we wanted them. We decided to move forward with that plan. And there were key things that we had to solve. The first one was staffing. How would we staff this? When we put the tents up, the tents had to be staffed around the clock. And so we got authorization from the city manager, not for a permanent solution, but for a solution for that weekend, that HART responders, we shifted their schedules and we ran 24/7 for that 3-day period, so that we would have 4 staff on overnight from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. and 2 staff that would staff the tents during the daytime. Emergency management provided us some important supplies. They donated 24 cots and I think about 80 or 90 different pillows and blankets for use in these tents. We worked with Parks and Rec in that week before to identify a location. We were looking for a park that was in close proximity to downtown, that was visible from the street. We ended up finding a park that also had access to restrooms, but I'll talk about that a little bit more. Parks and Recreation were an important department or a partner in this. We also had to find flat level land that could be staked for the tents. We worked with Piedmont Portables to have portable toilets on the location, 2 of them. We also worked with Duke Health Medical Reserve Corps. So this was through Duke Health Preparedness Coalition. They have a team of volunteers who are prepared to respond in certain emergency moments. We did, in a few days before the pilot started, emailed out to these volunteers. We had 2 folks express interest, 1 person commit to doing it, but then that person was unable to do it. So we ended up not having any volunteer capacity over this weekend span. So just noting that. So all those things really happened in a week. So it was, deciding to go and then getting all the pieces in place within 1 week. On the setup began Friday, that morning, January 19th. It involved the Durham Fire Department showing up. Duke Healthcare Preparedness Coalition brought these 2 heated tents and generators out to the park where we were operating. The Durham Fire Department, and it was probably about a dozen firefighters, helped set the tents up. It took them to set up 2 of these tents a few hours so that we were ready to go by kind of a little after noon. They also coordinated with the fire marshal to come out to inspect the tents. Because we had staff on site, we were able to make a commitment that we would be able to conduct fire watch, which lowered some of the things that had to be met to meet the fire marshal's approval, which meant that effectively we had not only staff on site, but staff awake, during that whole period. The generators were set up. We ended up using 3 generators over this weekend. One of the generators powered a large outdoor light, which was important because the the field that we were operating on was not lit. And that outdoor light was, I think, really, really helpful at creating both a safe and welcoming space. And then 2 other generators ultimately were used, 1 generator to power the HVAC unit at each of the tents. Our staff brought out the crisis response supplies that we already had on hand. In the report that you have a detailed list of all the supplies that we provided over the weekend, as well as supplies that we realized over the course of the weekend would be good in the future. And I can talk about that a little bit at the end. One of the lessons learned is while the fire department was happy to set up the tents, I don't think that it is a sustainable path that they would always be available to have 12 firefighters come to set up the tents every time. And I think they're happy to support this work, but would like additional support from some partners if we were to do this again. I'm going to move on now to talk about how the tents operated and how they worked. So again, I talked about staffing. So we had only HART staff on scene. There were no other public safety responders. The Durham Police Department did have officers who would kind of drive by and check on the area, but they weren't staffing the tent. So every night there were 4 staff responders, 2 per tent. And in the daytime, there were 2 staff HART responders. When folks arrived at the tents, they were greeted by HART responders. We had a very simple waiver that you have a copy of that we asked people to sign. But when they walked in, they were greeted. They were invited to find a cot. They were invited to bring their supplies in. Their supplies were not searched. They could bring their supplies in so long as they fit under the cot. And they were offered snacks and a warm drink. So we had within the tent set up hot cider and hot water for hot cocoa or things like that. It was, in terms of accessibility, we had portable bathrooms. One reason we set up the portable bathrooms was you had to cross a street to get to bathrooms that were open at the park. And we did not want neighbors having to cross a street overnight, potentially with poor lighting. We didn't want anyone to get hit by a car. And so we brought 2 portable pots and set them set up by the tents. Those portable toilets did not have lighting. And so we ended up plugging effectively LED Christmas lights into the generator and running them into each of the porta pots to create lighting overnight. The tents anyone could walk into the tents, and we had a lot of folks just kind of walk up and have access to them. People could show up under the influence. Our only rule was you could not use substances inside the tents. And we certainly had folks come who were intoxicated. We allowed folks to bring pets so long as they were willing to put their pets into a crate, which we had a couple of crates on site. I'll have to get my team to remind me if anyone actually took us up on that. But we did want to make sure, because we know that we have neighbors who do have animals, and sometimes that's a barrier to getting into shelter. So that was something we provided. In terms of capacity, so each tent, as I described, each tent had lights. The lights were dimmable. They had flooring so that you weren't on the bare ground, and each tent had 12 cots within them. So we could had a full capacity of 24. We worked with community development to determine how to prioritize these tents based on the perceived kind of needs for the system overall. And so we ended up having 1 tent for single men, 1 tent for single women and/or families. But during the course of this event, we only had single adults show up, both men and women. In terms of operational equipment, the most important operational equipment for us were the generators. Again, we had 2 small generators and 1 large one. All these generators functioned on fuel that you could get from a gas station. There wasn't a kind of a special kind of fuel. The generators had to be refilled every 12 to 24 hours. One of the lessons learned was, Duke Healthcare Preparedness Coalition is willing to be a partner depending on the criteria that we set in the future. They also provided all the gasoline that night. One of their requests is if this was to happen again, that the city or other partners find a way to provide that gasoline. That wasn't an expense they had budgeted to cover, but they did it over that weekend and were terrific partners. They came out multiple times overnight to refill generators. They also trained our staff over time in how to operate them. Another big lesson learned from these generators is in the first night especially, but also into the second day, the generators kept kicking off. And the reason they were kicking off is because too many things were being plugged into the outlets and it was tripping the generator. Now, there was a way around that, but I think kind of additional training for our staff, being aware of that, knowing that you didn't want to put everything into one outlet. These things, eventually, we got to smoother sailing with the generators. We were trained and had to go out overnight and restart the generator multiple times, which was fine. But the generators were crucial, and they were also a little tricky to manage. But with the right training, we got smoother sailing over time. And again, the outdoor floodlight on the large generator was really an important aspect of it. I mentioned the portable toilets as well. I keep going on. In terms of other supplies, we had a whole range of supplies from emergency supplies like Narcan kits, emesis bag, first aid kits, to water, snacks, as I mentioned, decaffeinated tea, apple cider, hot chocolate. One note is that we did not provide warm meals. We set these up in close enough proximity to urban ministry, which we knew provided meals. We weren't, in a week's time, we could not, that was one thing that we weren't ready to pull off, is the provision of warm meals inside of the tent. And so in the day, we would let people know the meals that they could go to urban ministries for. But what happened, and was really, really lovely, is there was an outpouring of community support. We had a number of folks bring and donate meals throughout, including people bought pizza from Pie Pushers that had delivered one evening, and Pie Pushers threw in additional food. There were a number of things like that of donations across, not only of food, but of warm clothes. The Durham Fire Department brought a bunch of jackets and hygiene kits and other things that we were able to provide to neighbors over the course of the weekend. But I think one lesson learned is it is really nice, especially when the weather remained very cold in the morning, for people not have to leave the tent at 9 a.m. to go get a warm meal someplace else. And so even our police officers brought, I think, warm biscuits one morning, which was really lovely, that they bought themselves and brought for neighbors who were in the tent. So it was really an effort made possible by a bunch of different community partners and volunteers in terms of donating supplies. We had a bunch of kind of sanitary items to clean the tents. Again, I won't go through all of the different supplies. One benefit of having heart responders is all the staff also had public safety radios. They had tablets that we were integrated into the 911 system. This was helpful on at least one occasion where a neighbor was released out of Duke Hospital, found their way to our tent, ended up having medical concerns overnight, and we had to radio to EMS. EMS came out and, upon assessment, transported the person back to the hospital. I'm just going to quick, as I'm going through the report, we had, in our very first night, Friday night, we had 7 neighbors stay overnight with us. In our second night, that rose to 16 neighbors. And by our final night, Sunday night, we were at full capacity with 24 neighbors staying in the tents. Overall, that was 42 unique people, because some people came multiple times. Some people came only once. And in terms of, we worked with the data that we had available from the sign-in sheets, we worked with Colin to cross-reference that with HMIS. 15 people of those 42 were found in HMIS with prior interactions with Entry Point. 16 people did not show any contact with Durham Entry Point, but it's possible they were in there and that the names were appearing differently and we just couldn't find them. And then 11 people could not be verified based on the name provided alone. So, you know, it is what it is, just providing that data in terms of what we know. Let's see, keep going here. In terms of the experiences of neighbors, one thing I want to note is we didn't do a lot of communication about this. One, we only had a week to do it. We provided flyers that you have a copy of in English and Spanish that we circulated to some of our partners, including public safety partners. We did not have any official communication from the city. There was no social media, no press release about this. It really relied on partners knowing about it and or public safety people finding neighbors in community and sharing this information. That's how people would learn about this. We had folks find us by just stumbling upon and walking in and seeing the tents because they were visible to the road. We had neighbors who were brought to us from public safety, especially overnight, later in the evening. We had neighbors who public safety may have given flyers out the day before and came as the weather continued and was colder. We had, again, someone come from Duke Hospital after being released late at night. We had a neighbor who was kicked out of a shelter over evening, and the police department brought them to our shelter. So those were a variety of ways in which people found us. In general, the feedback we got from neighbors was very positive about this experience. From a range of appreciation for having someplace safe and warm to be, to appreciating the feeling of a non-judgmental location, to low barrier and easy to access, to feeling safe and comfortable. There were a range of different things. I will note that I stayed in the tents one of the nights, and one of my own, when people came into the tents, they very quickly came to a cot, and basically, in most cases, found their cot, had a hot beverage, and kind of kept to themselves and rested on their tent until the morning. We didn't have any activities. We had no safety issues arise over it, and our staff felt safe throughout the entire experience, which is important to lift up. But I think I did note that folks could just walk up and access the tent. They didn't have to go through another kind of another process to get referred to us. Talked about the staff part. Let me talk about some additional considerations. I think there are opportunities, if this were to happen in the future, to broaden partnerships and have more wraparound services available and come out to the tents. Because we only had a week to plan, we were limited in our ability to do some of that. We wonder if there is an opportunity for volunteers. Again, we only had a week. We did try to reach out to volunteers. We did not have any volunteers actually staff, but it is, I think, a question of interest whether or not there is a role for volunteers in this, what type of training, if any, they would need to feel comfortable and prepared, what type of public safety presence would be needed regardless of volunteers. These are questions that we really bring to you that we think are important. We think if there was, again, more opportunity for planning, one thing Colin and I talked about is having community development or other staff there to make sure that we're working with everyone, to make sure that they're in entry point, to kind of do that, pulling them into the system while they're at the tents. We heard from Fresh Start Durham, who they were happy to partner in the future if we were able to do this, to have showers, their portable shower facility out by the tents. And again, we think if this was a strategy that HSAC was supportive of and wanted to do more of, that expanded outreach, expanded communication to our resettled refugee population, to Spanish-speaking neighbors and others, are real opportunities where we did not have effort or time to do it. And greater communication could really expand the number of neighbors that benefited from this, as well as I mentioned earlier, I think providing warm meals on sites, especially if the weather is going to stay very cold and not warm up during the day. Neighbors did not have to leave during the day. They could come in it over the evening. They could stay throughout the day, and we had a mixture. Neighbors were also able to come and go. So if someone came in, got a hot beverage, and they did not want to stay overnight, that was fine. They could come and go as they wanted to. Most people ended up deciding that they wanted to stay throughout the night. Some materials that we noted, adult diapers, disposable earplugs. These are things that we did not have that we, upon reflection, some extra chairs for people to sit during the day. We also did not have any of our EMTs because we were low staffed in that particular area. And having an EMT as a part of this seemed like a type of staffing position that would have been helpful. Let me pause there for immediate questions you have from all of us. You have a bunch of information, and I'll open for questions for you, but I'm also going to throw out a question to kick off this section. The first question is, we're sharing this with you for a reflection from this group about, is this type of strategy something that HSAC wants to have available and be prepared to do when our capacity is not enough and we know that we have extra cold weather or other types of maybe extreme weather. So are there any aspects of this pilot that HSAC thinks can inform future planning that might be good to incorporate into options that HSAC or city partners can deploy? If so, what strategies might be worth repeating in the future and why? So I'll open it up with that question to you, but also welcome your questions from me.
Any questions?
I also have budget items if you're interested in what this cost us at least.
I think, I know somebody had asked me at one point kind of what the estimated cost was, Ryan, so it would be probably a good
So this
idea
is
for
this
that.
is our estimated cost. Obviously, we were using staff that we had, but if we estimated that with staffing, a staffing model that was paying 4 staff overnight and 2 staff during the day, so you have 24 with that staffing model plus supplies, we estimate about $2,350 per 24-hour period. For now, that's assuming a capacity of 24 for exactly that model.
And Ryan, that
That's what
assumes
the estimated cost
also,
was. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, that assumes also that all of the supplies and the tents and everything are provided again, right?
That doesn't count. So that budget supplies, that assumes that the tents and the generators are supplied.
Right.
I will say that they're not here. I did talk, had follow-up conversations with Duke Healthcare Preparedness Coalition, and they're open to be a part of a strategy. What they would want established is they'd want to know what the criteria was and understand the potential of how often that could happen. I think before making a full commitment, but they are certainly open if HSAC was interested in engaging them as being an ongoing partner. We would just want to set clear criteria that they were supportive of, that they had a sense of how often it might be needed.
So this is Sharita. So first of all, I just want to thank you guys for being able to leverage this type of response in the community. We haven't always been able to have some of those players at the table actively ready to engage. And so I think that is phenomenal. My biggest concern would be what Duke Health is willing to continue to cover in order for us to do it. Like, will they continue to do the tents and the generators, things like that, like what their thought behind what they would be able to contribute. And then my other question would be about staffing, because that piece is huge. I do think there is room for us to maybe get a trained pool of volunteers together, but we would still need some paid staff people who are savvy to kind of also be there for support. And so those two, like what is Duke prepared to consistently give to that effort? What things will be required of the continuum partners to do? And then how do we ensure that there is always some paid staff available? Will that be some hard, or would there be this thought that hard would phase out and somebody else would do it? Things like that.
Right. Let me just speak to that last one real quick. I don't know if my boss is on here. He said I was free to, in his words, throw him under the bus. But what the manager's office has made clear to me is that HART is not intended to serve as a long-term staffing solution for this. So I think what I do think is, and what I'd like to hear from HSAC is, even there may be still a need for some public safety presence if we were to imagine doing this. I think it's on the table that HART could be a partner in a more limited role if that were the case. If the only way to do this is to have some public safety presence, I think we would need that public safety presence from HART to be lower than it was this time in the future, so that we're not bearing the full staff of, we're not the full staffing presence for this with 4 HART responders overnight and 2 during the day. But I think if the model worked with having, a smaller public safety presence from HART or others, then that might be on the table. But I do think Bo wanted to make sure that I said that clearly, even though I will say that our department found a lot of joy in this. We love doing it. We love being part of this, but we are not, we're not currently at a staffing place where we can make a ongoing commitment to be the sole carrier of the staffing for this. And so we would be looking for other partners to contribute, whatever that is, that HSAC would have to figure out, or this group.
Thanks, Ryan.
Oh, wait a
Any
second.
other-
Yeah.
Lloyd has
thank-
his hand up.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan, for all that great information. I appreciate it, especially appreciate the agreement that neighbors made when they entered the tent. Really appreciate the good work on that. More generally, I'd be curious if you have any information on roughly what percentage of HART's work is with unsheltered neighbors in the Durham community. You have any sense for that?
I do have a sense. I don't know that I can give you a percentage off the top of my head. Anise, who was on this call, might be able to, looking at our dashboard, give a sense. I mean, I will say that for our community responders, our responder team, which is one of our programs, the top call they respond to far and away is trespass. Trespass calls are in our 911 system very often involve neighbors who are unsheltered or unhoused. It may not be exclusively that, but that is the lion's share of those calls. So a lot of our work intersects with neighbors who are unsheltered or unhoused in Durham, but we certainly respond to a whole range of other calls that are not about that. But it's a significant portion of our work.
Thank you.
Just to chime in there real quick, of the about 4,500 neighbors who we've interacted with and have documentation on, about 22% had some kind of housing related need. Now, whether that meant that they were unsheltered is different. A chunk of those folks were, I'd have to look into the numbers a little bit further, but about 22% needed some kind of housing support.
And Anise, there's another question in the chat. Just can you provide the age breakdown for folks who are using the tents? Do we have that?
We'd have to go back and look in the HMIS.
Well, for those that we have, and we did not collect date of birth on our information. We were minimal in the information that we collected. We had people sign the waiver that you have a copy of, and so we did not collect date of birth. I don't think so. I do see a hand up from Tasha.
Thank you, Ryan. Do we have an idea, without Nicole being on the call, how many of the overflow shelters housed families that weekend? Not
Colin,
families.
can you answer?
I'm accustomed to saying families, excuse me, singles.
Oh, okay, got it.
Well, hold on a second. What was the question exactly, Tasha? It broke up for a second on my end.
How many singles were housed in the overflow? So Urban Ministries, Open Table Ministries. And again, I keep saying families.
Oh, okay. On that particular night, it would have.
Yes,
on
or the
on
weekend.
singles.
So the 19th through the
Everybody would have been full that weekend,
okay.
assuming everybody showed up at Urban Ministries. I'd have to go pull the HMIS data, and maybe Sheldon or somebody from his team may remember over Martin Luther King weekend whether or not all 6 male beds and I think it's 4 or 5 female beds were full that weekend. But I know that Entry Point had referred folks to those beds for the weekend, just like they had been referred over to Families Moving Forward for overflow.
Absolutely. Yeah, we
I
received.
think, Tasha, it's also important to point out that the week before HART stood up the tents, the lead agency worked with UMD to return their capacity to 50 people. So just prior to the tents being stood up, about 30 males were referred to UMD for shelter, and this all happened within the same week, just before the emergency tents. So once the tents went up and stood up, those 24 folks, we saw a substantial decline in the numbers for that particular period. Like it went down to the teens briefly. And then after that, it started to creep back up. So there was a serious burden relief on the system when all those partners came together to make this work. And I think that's worth noting.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
I see Drew's hand.
Thanks, Sharita. Just wanted to follow up too, and just I was curious about family utilization that same weekend, either at FMF or UMD's overflow beds. I know, Ryan, you mentioned that you all had space for families and none utilized it. So I was just curious about utilization rates for that weekend and other overflow beds for families. We had 6 at or at Open Table, excuse me, over this winter period.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Drew. Nicole knows this. We received 3 referrals for all of our 3 rooms, and no family showed up, and we assumed they all went to the tents. No one came that weekend.
No one came to the tents, so I don't know where they went. But.
Interesting. I know I asked the question earlier about the breakdown. I would hope that in the future, if we decide to move forward with this, that we at least track age. And the reason why is because there are 2 things that we know we have challenges with here in our city, is that we know that our homeless population is aging. So I would be curious to see how many people are there and if they're 55 and older. And number 2 is we just have a problem quantifying our transition age youth numbers. That's the group between, I put 18, but it's 16 to 24. And I think that, when we do things like this, I think being able to utilize that data to identify any of those groups is huge. And will help us as a continuum be more responsive to those age groups that we feel like we are either underrepresenting or maybe not having the opportunity to serve because they're not connecting. I see 2 hands and I don't know who was first, Russ or Jeffrey. Go ahead, Russ. You're the first on my screen.
So, and thanks Ryan and team for the work and the pulling this together really fast and sharing some of the insights. One of the things, I don't know if this is something for you all to answer, but something for us to try and figure out, I guess, collectively over time is really ways to track. Tasha brought up a good point. 3 people were referred to overflow at Families Moving Forward and didn't show up. We hear that on a regular basis. I know from conversation with folks at Entry Point in Durham, at times when we announce that there's a white flag coming, people will call and, when it's not a hotel room and it's not a hotel room for the amount of time that they want, they will decline. I don't know how well some of this stuff is being tracked, but it's stuff we see we do seem to be seeing regularly. And I know that in the past, like this, I'm probably going back to fall 19, when one of the hurricanes came through down east, a shelter, not unlike this, was stood up inside the old Sears at Northgate. Whole bunch of people even migrated out of urban ministries up there, just kind of to be in a different setting. Thinking there might be other resources there, or 2 or 3 of them said that they thought the rules would be different. And so I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how, while we're working on these capacity pieces, can we do some data tracking for this kind of spectrum of needs to preferences? And I don't want to, but I know people have a lot of preferences for how we can respond in the middle of an emergency. But sometimes our main thing is just getting people to not freeze to put it rather bluntly. So I don't know how we can start tracking some of that, because I mean, I get it. I mean, anytime, any community you open up something of this nature, there's going to be people showing up that maybe don't use the normal system, regular system. And a lot of that may have to do with preferences. I don't know how we start tracking that. I don't know that I'm making sense. I'm still adjusting to the time change, so I apologize for rambling.
Jeffrey, go ahead, and then I can respond to or offer my thoughts on some of that.
Okay, thank you. Earlier we were talking about the families who didn't show. We're looking at some data. Statistically, during holidays and during extreme weather events, oftentimes family will allow their homeless family members to come home and stay, not on a long-term basis. So it's not uncommon whenever there's an extreme weather event or during the holidays for the families to kind of give a little bit of grace. So offer shelter or offer an opportunity to come home. Oftentimes people will choose to go home, even if it's for a brief time. And they often show right back up in the system after the event. And we always see it after the holidays. We always see an uptick because the same thing happens after the holidays as well.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Russ, one thing I just want to, I guess, share back is one thing that we've been interested in trying to learn more about from our neighbors is why is it that some neighbors' preferences are to remain and to sleep outdoors even in cold weather. And so we have been conducting a survey with a variety of our neighbors that we can share maybe at the next one or send to Colin to circulate. We surveyed neighbors about their decisions around shelter, their barriers around accessing current shelters, reasons why they may choose to remain outdoors even in very inclement cold weather. And then we've held some follow-up focus groups with neighbors to understand those decisions. So I think that's helpful for us to share back with you. We're finalizing what we have learned through those efforts. I think we have one more focus group coming up and would love to either come back and share that with you or just send it for you, you all to have as an additional data point at thinking about the reasons that people make the decisions that they do. I think one thing that we don't have in the data that we provided you is how recently did any of the folks who are already in our HMS system stay at another one of the shelters, or had it been a while? So I think that's important. But one thing is clear is that by the third night, we were at full capacity. And that if the other shelters were at capacity, that means we have a capacity issue. If they weren't at capacity, then I think it just invites ongoing reflection about the extent to which we need different kinds of spaces in addition to the wonderful spaces that we have now to meet people where they're at in very cold moments to make sure that we keep them safe. So if having a pet is a barrier, if other things are barriers, to take those barriers seriously and think about, do we have the capacity to meet those on very cold nights or not? So we'll share that survey with you when it's ready.
Are there any additional questions? Ryan, again, we thank you. We look forward to continuing to work and partner with HEART and continue our white flag and beyond conversations. The next item on our agenda is about white flag planning.
Did Russ have a question real quick, Rita? Russ, are you with your questions?
So, and I don't have the agenda, so maybe you're about to go into this, Sharita. I guess my question is, it's March. So this is coming up in 7 months. You know, this is my cranky thing, right, Sharita? Is that the next agenda item? Is when does
white flag discussion? Yes.
Yeah, we
when
started
does planning start, and what does that planning process look like? That's my only question. I'll be quiet.
So we started the planning process last month, Russ. We started, yeah. So that's what happens when you don't come to meetings and decide not to be on the committee anymore. You miss out on this fun and exciting stuff. So we started the conversation last month and invited Ryan this month because we were talking about the cost of hotels and trying to figure out churches and possible looking at other options to get back to a congregate model that would be perhaps more cost effective and perhaps be able to assist more people on a more consistent basis. So thank you for bringing that up. Sorry, Madam Chair, I didn't mean to jump in over
No,
you.
it's okay. I mean, I think, having, Drew spoke last month, right? To kick it off, having Hart kind of talk about this 3-day pilot that we did, and then moving on into this discussion is like timely. I think, once we kind of master what our white flag response is going to be, then we can start to apply hopefully some of that response to other adverse weather situations. Because, I call you when it's going to be raining like out the wazoo, or if there is a tornado, or trying to figure out what is our response. And so I think being able to actually start this conversation early is great, which segues us into our white flag planning for 2024-25 winter. And Ryan asked us some questions that I think we need to discuss as a part of that response. So the floor is open to you, Colin, and all to start to chip away at what our plan for 2024-2025 is going to be.
Yeah, so this is kind of where we wanted to talk through, like Drew shared last month, that the motel rooms, while they are great, are very expensive, and it creates problems on the coordinated entry folks when it's time for folks to move on from those motel rooms. A room might be open at the shelter, and folks don't want to go to the shelter because they're comfortable in a motel room. The hope was the motel rooms would be able to be used as, a great place and a great incentive to not go to shelter by working towards permanent housing options and being able to do that. We have had a few people who rooms became available at shelter, and these are people that we knew were going to need longer stays than the temporary shelter would allow. So going to the emergency shelter would provide some additional stability for perhaps a little bit longer. And we have had folks refuse to go. Ebony and I've talked about one of those families a couple of times, and it gets tricky. So trying to move away from that motel model and the fact that we just can't rent enough rooms to meet the need with short notice. That's one of the reasons that we've got these 10 rooms for 4 or 5 months, is because in order to ensure we have 10 rooms when it is cold, we had to kind of have them booked all the time. And if we're going to be paying for them for a month, we might as well be using them, given the numbers of folks that we've had experiencing unsheltered homelessness in Durham. We didn't want those rooms to be sitting empty while we're paying for them. So that's how we got to where we are now. When during COVID, when Open Table was running the congregate socially distanced shelter at Trinity, that worked fairly well for some people, but it did not work well for those who were mobility challenged. And I recall EMS needing to carry people down the stairs and EMS coming the next morning to carry them back up the stairs. So that's not really a sustainable model either. And as Drew shared last month, when we're looking at using churches and their fellowship halls or other areas not necessarily a sanctuary, can get tricky during the winter months, especially during Christmas and the holy season, where you've got services and rehearsals and plays and all the other things that churches do during that time that tie up a lot of that community space when folks would be ordinarily coming in to sleep. So, this is kind of where we are. One of the ideas that we did have when we stood up the tents was perhaps using Urban Ministries, and the Urban Ministries cafe and multi-purpose room, and being able to use that as a congregate space. And Sheldon, correct me if I'm wrong, Urban Ministries was open to using that space on those overnights. The challenge was there wasn't enough staff. And if you're going to bring in a lot of folks to to be in that area, you needed additional staff. So we did explore that option, and the Heart team was not allowed to. Trying to think what was, I don't know, the guidance that we got from the city manager, Ryan, was the Heart team wasn't able to staff that location, but we're not sure.
Yeah, we presented two options to the city manager's office. One was, and they weren't mutually exclusive. One was having some of our staff help Urban Ministries expand their capacity by adding staff inside the building. The other was the tents. We were only cleared to do the tents. We were not cleared to add staff to Urban Ministries, and I don't see that decision changing from the city manager's office. Yeah, that's an accurate description.
So if we were able to use Urban Ministries as an overflow, we would have to figure out the staffing structure. And whether you did it at Urban Ministries or at a church, would you do it only on really cold nights? Or would we want to do it sort of like what we've been doing for the last couple of years? It's just open for the season. Regardless of temperature, people can come in and out. The advantage to having it open for the season, it makes it a whole lot easier to hire people because you've got guaranteed shifts versus opening it only during cold nights. It can be tricky to line up people with very short notice to come in for those cold nights to add additional bodies. So that's kind of where we are at this point, is kind of talking through what type of model looks well so that Open Table Ministries, who currently has a contract for weather-related shelter, can, kind of start working on that. And if we need to make adjustments, we can start sort of figuring that out. So that's kind of where we are as a baseline for discussion and thinking through what the next step should be. I see, Jeff, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm having trouble unmuting myself here. I guess what, I wouldn't say troubling, but whenever we had the power outage, there was a shelter stood up immediately almost over at Northern. So, and these were for neighbors who normally have a house, but then suddenly didn't have the ability to use it. I don't know what model they use, but there should be something that we should be able to glean from that, because they were very rapidly able to stand this up. And I don't know if they had to go through fire marshal or what, but they did it. And I think that given that sense of urgency was given to people who were housed, I don't see why we couldn't have that same sense of urgency when we hit a situation as far as weather as well. I know there are different partners involved, but I still feel there's something that we can glean from that, and that we should be able to utilize the same type of urgency when we have a situation.
I can share a little bit on that because that was emergency management.
Right.
And emergency management follows their protocol. And when they have to staff those, they pull from DSS and they pull from public health. Those staff get pulled in and their shifts are changed. So could we do that on the homeless side? Sure. We would just have to have nonprofit partners willing to, reassign their staff, and perhaps you have to have enough staff, obviously, because if you're pulling your day staff to do overnights, then you've got no day staff. It's sort of walking that fine line. So that's how the emergency management response is written, and they do that for those types of things when it impacts a wide variety of folks. But emergency management has made it clear that they don't stand up for every weather-related thing just for people experiencing homelessness. It's up to the homeless system to figure out how to do that.
I'm also mean the location. They were able to get Northern with no issue whatsoever. And I'm not sure about permitting or whatever the case may be, but they were able to stand up a location. More so concerned about location.
Because the high schools are listed in the emergency management response plan as emergency shelters for these types of events.
But also the new Northern High School opened up this school year. So before, Northern was not necessarily like a go-to option. And I think the reason why they were so rapidly able to do that is because, and Sheldon, I saw your hand. I hope you still have a question. I think they were so able to do it because that building was not in use. that was the old building that they opened up. And so I think I called Colin that day when they opened it up and said, hey, can we get that space? Because they have a gym and it's bathrooms and showers and stuff that's already there. Like, I don't know what DPS is playing, or the county, whoever we have to go to ask if that's an option. But that's definitely a big space that we hadn't had access to. That would be great. The location is not the best,
Right.
but hey, it's a big space. Sheldon, did you?
Yep. So I guess the question I had was going back to the comment about clearance for heart team participation and staffing. And I definitely would be curious to understand why you couldn't get approval to do that. Um, just for my own just knowledge now and I guess going forward into the future. But I do, in thinking about that, yes, so the staffing to me is the biggest part, right? Because I know we continue to have difficulties just staffing for normal operations. And so when you think about ramping it up, if that's another 4, 6 people for some period of time, that's going to be a critical piece to this, no matter where we do it at. And, if there are some kind of barriers for having outside supports for staffing, then I think it sounds like it's better to do it at a different location than at UMD. If that provides some type of clearance for more people being able to be a part of
If I
sharing.
can piggyback on that question a little bit too, Sheldon, because one of the things I've been thinking of as we think through 24, 25 is having multi-pronged approach as opposed to just having one solution that's going to say this is going to solve every person's needs, because there's a lot of groups. I shared this last month, whether it's families with children, whether it's singles, whether it's first responders, that there's so many different there needs to be a multifaceted approach to addressing this issue. One of the things I'm thinking about, and I'd be curious about as well, Sheldon, is if Hart could staff only on those white flag nights and say that's going to be our no turn away option. Because regardless of what Open Table can do next winter, I can't imagine us being able to provide staffing that's no turn away. Like whether it's just our staff or a mix of volunteers as well, there's going to be a check-in window. And once that window is checked in, our shelter is going to be closed for the night. And so I'm wondering if, OTM says this is our capacity for white flag nights during the winter, but on those really cold nights, like regardless, because I think, again, like Colin said too, sometimes we do seasonal type of, this is going to be for an extended period of time, but could Hart provide no turn away support at Urban Ministry on those really cold nights? Because I think that could provide another essential piece to a very complicated puzzle that is white flag for our entire continuum.
May I speak to this real quick, since I know Hart was brought up twice? So one thing that I feel like I've heard consistently from the city manager's office, especially from my boss, who's Deputy City Manager Bo Ferguson, is really looking to HSAC to provide recommendations and policy guidance. So I don't know that I actually had a detailed conversation with the city manager, Sheldon, about why that was ruled out for us. We put together a memo. The manager had 24 hours to advise us. We were told we couldn't do option A, which was adding capacity U. We could do option B. And we did not spend time, nor did I have the time to sit down with the manager and unpack that, but I'm happy to. I think the most important thing in this moment for this committee and then for the larger HSAC is, as a group, to figure out what it is that you want to see happen and to bring forward those recommendations. If those recommendations involve some role for Hart, I think it's important for HSAC to say that, and then for the city manager and others to make a decision about that and be in conversation about it. So I mean, I guess that's where I live right now. I'm happy. We can talk more about it, Sheldon, and get additional guidance around anything particular to that strategy that is concerning, and we can follow up on that in the next week or so, that can inform this planning. But I think at this point, I would just encourage you all think about what you think best positions Durham to respond in these moments, and what multi-pronged strategy you want, and what role various partners will play. And if HART has a role in that to play, you should name that and request that.
Thanks.
Yep.
I think staffing is gonna be a continuing challenge for us, no matter what our response looks like. Being able to have those people, I think especially overnight, is going to be a challenge, and so we do have to figure it out. I do agree that it needs to be multi-pronged. I do think that we need to take into considerations where people show up as well, as far as how much resource we allocate to each strategy. And I'm definitely not saying we just offer a whole bunch of hotels, because I know that's just not realistic. But I think that I think that we have to figure out some way to be able to provide an array of a coordinated, winter months response that meets the needs of at least the tangible needs, like of urgency. Like if somebody has a CPAP machine and they need to be able to hook up, that might be the person that gets a hotel space as opposed to not. But I feel like we need to figure out what that is too, in the midst of us planning what our response is going to be. Any other questions?
Russ brought up some ideas in the chat. I'm just curious for people's reflection on those ideas about something in Winston-Salem and something in Greensboro. Russ, could you share a little bit more?
I'm afraid it'll be repeat information from several folks, but in Winston, and the name of the group just went out of my head. I want to say it's Community with Dwellings, but there's a group in Winston that has worked with, my understanding is dedicated spaces with faith communities. So things can kind of be set up and left, say in a fellowship hall. And part of that is the fact that post-COVID situation for most churches has changed dramatically. They do have extra space. Many of them are talking about building affordable housing on their property. So potentially experimenting with hosting this for a few weeks might be something different. I think the situation has changed a lot in the last 4 years. The other is, and it really is a terrible name, the Pallet Village in Greensboro is basically small storage buildings from what it looks like to me, but they're housing 56 folks in Greensboro that way. They've done it for 2 years in cooperation with their, it's called the IRC, which is basically their version of Oak City Cares. It's been going on now for 14 years or more. It's been in operation for a long, long time. So the Pallet Village is just these last 2 years. But it does not run the entire year. So I'm assuming it's done March or sometime into April.
And to add on to that, the article that you had the link for, Russ, indicates the budget, I think, for that, or the cost for the city was $200,000 a year for that Pallet Village, which is probably comparable to what we're spending for the motels in the contract with Open Table Ministry.
We served a lot. I mean, the first year we did White Flag for the full season with Open Table, when we had motel plus congregate, it was about 228, and we served at least 50 people a night during that time frame. It's obviously gotten a little bit more expensive as hotels have come back online and prices have changed. We're not able to get the great deals that we got at Carolina Duke at the Carolina Duke Inn for $40 or $50 a night anymore, or $70 a night. It's now about $100 a night wherever we can go now. So it's going to be a couple $100,000 no matter how you slice or dice it.
And I will say, I don't think it would be that hard to find land to something like that on, even temporarily. We have a piece that could potentially be used that's already fenced, and potentially has a faith community nearby that could be accessible, one or two. if something like that wanted to be experimented. But I mean, there's a whole lot of different complexity to this, and I agree with Sharita that, you know, we need to know more of needs and preferences, and then what the different solution opportunities are.
The pallets do set up a similar challenge as the motel rooms for going back to a congregate shelter. That is just one caveat to put with them. I think they do meet a great need and they can serve a really good purpose.
Whether
What's
it's-
in the pallet? I mean, other than it being like a shed, is it a bath? Does it have a bathroom in it?
Nope,
Oh, no,
bathroom.
no. I mean, it's my sense, if you look at the pictures, it looks like small storage sheds to me. And I don't know enough about, that's why I keep thinking a few of us need to just hop in a van and go see. I don't know how they're handling heating and different pieces. It's more to be interior, something enclosed, even temporarily. So,
Hang on.
they're not tiny homes. No.
Right.
No.
Not at $200,000 per winter. There's no way. So
I'm just wondering how they heat them.
They're little that you have to run power. There's little heating, air conditioning, mini splits that are attached to them. So you have to run power out to them, and then you have a sort of a congregate bathroom, sort of like not porta-johns necessarily, but you could use porta-johns nearby.
But and do we know like what when they disassemble them and move them, like does it still do they still see people congregate in those areas? What their safety parameters are, like what their, like do we know all those logistical pieces to that if we're looking at that as a potential option?
Sarita, do you want to see it?
I don't know why some people just don't go
I
see
have
it
the
and they
pictures
don't
on
go out.
screen. I have the pictures on my screen. If you'd like to see it.
I would like to go not just see a picture, but see it. Like go see it. So I don't know. How long are they up? Do we know their season?
I just put a link to a website for a group who we get emails from on a regular basis to buy from. We would need to go through some procurement process to be able to do this, finding the land, figuring out who's buying, who's storing, who's doing. There's a lot of pieces to this. We did explore pallet shelters during the pandemic as part of the emergency response. And it can be done. It definitely is an option. You put them up, you can take them down. You got to figure out if you're not going to keep them up year round and use them year round, you got to figure out where you're storing them. You've also got to make sure that one of the other things that we found when we were looking at it, we had found a location we thought we could use. The challenge, it was down by the old Boys and Girls Club off of Pettigrew. There's a field over there that we thought would work. The challenge was, as we were thinking through the logistics, if you're in a field, you got to deal with mud and accessibility and the rain and things. And it makes it very difficult for folks with wheelchairs or walkers to get to them. So you got to figure out a hard deck surface, or you got to find a parking lot. If you don't have a parking lot that's not going to be used for an entire, several month period of time, you got to figure out how do you make sure you don't have people sinking in mud. The other piece you have to make sure you got to run temporary electrical power and get Duke to come run power. If you don't have plumbing, I think there's some shower truck type options and porta-johns that you're using. So it can be done. When we looked at it and ran the numbers for the time period that we thought we needed to do it, the hotel at the time, hotels and doing this was about the same cost. Those costs have now changed and things have shifted a lot. So I think it's definitely worth exploring and trying to run some numbers and what would it take to build out that infrastructure.
Looking at these pictures that Jeffrey just shared the link, I'd encourage people to click on it. It looks like what Greensboro did it wasn't creating congregate places. It doesn't look like. It looks like these. I'm curious how many people. It looks like one person, I'm guessing, per each of these small units. I mean, that's a really interesting model.
You can get them to house one or two people, depending on which setup you have. From what I recall.
Sounded like in Greensboro, they do 2 people per home. Per unit.
So we did this, if this was something we were realistically considering, if the investment was made for us to do it, would this be like our only option to offer? I mean, just because of the cost, or would we have a set number of units for this kind of option and then other options as well?
I think it would come down to the cost and how many of these could you buy, how many can fit in one place, and how would you staff it? The other challenge is, like we've run into in the past, is staffing 2 locations.
Yeah.
And it's been a challenge. Urban Ministries has staffed 2 locations before. Open Tables staffed 2 locations. It's tough. It's tough to hire enough people and have enough coverage, especially during those cold weather months. And when it's icy or snowy, people really don't want to come in if they don't have to. Making sure you've got coverage on Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, Christmas Day, Thanksgiving Day. Those are all challenges that all the shelters have. And when you're trying to run those in multiple locations, because if you do those pallet homes, you're not going to sit there and leave them empty all winter. You know, and only use them when it's really cold out. If you have them and you've paid for them, you're going to use it as a shelter expansion, similar to what we've done with the motel rooms.
Okay, so I see 3 hands. Russ, Tasha, and Sheldon. I think Sheldon was the last hand. Tasha, you want to go? And then Russ, and then Sheldon.
Yes, thank you. Russ was actually first, so I hope it's okay, Russ, that I'm jumping. So looking at the pictures, and thank you for sharing the pictures, this is helpful. If we accommodate 2, will we have a plan for families where we can meet the need, because the number continues to rise for the number of unsheltered families?
That's a great question, Tasha. I don't have an answer for that. I mean, that goes back to, we also are historically showing families are not showing up to options unless it's a motel room. So are families truly in need, or are they only in need when there's a better option than being doubled up with family or friends? And I don't know an answer to that.
Russ. Unmute, Russ.
My problem, sorry. So I'm not a committee member of this group anymore, so I can't motion or anything. I guess my question is, could this group not determine, like, create a task force or something to go and come up with a plan in partnership with the city, and kind of pull all these ideas together of, like, here's things we feel like need to be addressed in that plan? Because I feel like oftentimes we do struggle in our groups to, we can name a lot of challenges, we can at times even name some options, but getting an actual plan is challenging for us because there's so many of us passionate about so many things. So I'm just asking if there is a way that this could be referred to a group to take quick action and look at these, what we've learned from heart, what we know from our experience over many years, and kind of go from there. So something actionable could come back to this group, and be aligned even with budgeting.
So that is a very good idea. I think we tried to coordinate a winter shelter group before, and it didn't work. So we just decided to incorporate it into our meetings. But being that if we're going to have this kind of turnout, then I think we have the merit to be able to absolutely create a working group that is specifically responsible for working on a plan and then reporting that back to policy and planning. What do you think, Colin?
What I would like, and I'm glad Drew's here. So the city has a contract that's in the process of being executed that goes through June of 2025 for weather-related shelter with Open Table Ministry. So I would say that we may ask Drew if he would be willing to sort of create some plans and ideas and pull together whoever he needs to pull together to figure out what the viable options are and sort of come back and say, hey, this is what we as a group are coming back with. Because the money's allocated, it's in a budget, it's in a contract. Open Table has it, and they know what they can do. If we need to shuffle things or try to find additional funds, then that's something we'd have to go back to the drawing board on, and we would probably have to go through a procurement process. So if we need to add more money into it, we would definitely need to do something a little bit different and do that sooner than later.
I'm happy to spearhead that. It was something that we were thinking about doing informally in March, is doing some listening sessions. We've already had some of those going on. We met with someone from the Lived Experience group to just get their feedback. I'm happy to set up maybe a couple calls in March if Colin or Sharita, if folks just want to direct everyone to my email address, or however you all want to go about that, setting it up logistically. Internally, what we've kind of outlined are, here are options that we can do, and trying to put a price tag on those of like what that would look like for our budget, to say, you know, this is how much hotel rooms cost, this is how much a congregate option cost, and then I'm happy to come back to the policy and planning and kind of share what our options are, knowing that it's never going to be enough. I think that's what it kind of lands to, is especially my personal frustrations and experiences around the motel rooms is that 4 years ago, there were a lot of options and now there are none. And so this idea that we can just add more rooms quickly is not a reality anymore. And so, you know, it's just understanding the limitations of what we can offer and being able to communicate that widely is at least one of the biggest areas of growth I have, is or biggest opportunities for growth, is seeing how Open Table can be a communication convener of when white flag's coming up, saying, hey, here are different options that are available. But that's just, you know, so many options, and there's, like I said, so many limitations to what we can offer, specifically around hotel rooms. Like, we're not able to add 5 quickly when there's going to be a cold weather, because the hotel can't guarantee that. 3 of the sites that we have previously used are now bought out in our apartments, studio apartments. So just, I'm happy to communicate that. And if, however, Colin or Sharita would like to handle setting that up, I'm happy to reach out to this group and to others who would want to be included in that.
I think that's a great idea. Persons in the group, if you're interested, can you please put your email in the chat? And then Melissa or Keisha, can we get those email addresses to Drew? And will that help you, Drew, to kind of gather those folks?
Yeah,
So if you're
that'd be great. And like I said, I'd love to have a couple conversations.
Right. So if you're interested, please put your email address there, and it's open to anyone who is willing to help us come up with our winning plan for 24-25. We have 5 minutes left for our meeting. And we have one more item on our agenda. I guess we can table it to the next meeting. I'm hoping that prior to that, I will get an opportunity to at least sit down with a few folks, Colin, Sheldon, Nicole, Shona, around this, and Tasha. And it is about our medically fragile pilot. So a few months ago in December, we did meet with a group of community partners about our aging folks and our folks that have functional limitations and being in shelter. and kind of looking at how we allocate beds to the shelter and work with folks in light that we do have a 30-day shelter policy. So since we are out of time, we can come back and present to your group about what we discussed. But hopefully Nicole, Sheldon, Colin, Shona, Tasha, we can get together prior to our April meeting to talk a little bit realistically about how we lay out such a plan. Unless anybody has anything pressing they want to share right in this moment, but we have 3 minutes. As I'm not hearing any pressing questions, I will entertain a motion for us to adjourn our meeting.
I'll
If
make a
that is-
motion.
All right, I have a motion from Angela. Can I get a second?
And before
Colin, you're
Yep,
saying something, Colin. Go ahead.
Yep, before we leave, just for everybody's notification, it is Lloyd's birthday, so be sure to wish Lloyd a happy birthday today.
Happy birthday there, Lloyd.
Happy
You're
birthday.
25, Lloyd.
Happy birthday, Lloyd.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday,
Whoever
buddy.
made the chat rain birthday cakes, that was amazing. Kudos to that. That was a great move. Oh, it's good. Again, it's raining cakes. Man.
Happy birthday.
All right, you guys, have a great rest of your week and a great March. Take care.
Wow.